Hello, hello, and welcome once again to the David Messiah YouTube channel, where our watchwords are to teach and to build back up the kingdom of Zion. And my name is Sidney Thomas. I'm the founder and the moderator of this YouTube channel. The title of this presentation is Why the So-Called Jewish Messiah is Not the David Messiah. Why the so-called Jewish Messiah is not the David Messiah. And I am sort of guided to do this talk because just recently in the news, certainly on YouTube, there has been talk of some young Jewish rabbi, 32 years old, that they're giving him the title of Yanuka Rav, Shlomo Yehuda. He is somehow over there being acclaimed as the so-called Jewish Messiah. And there are old rabbis there fawning over him, kissing his hand and so forth. And he is reputed to have memorized the Torah and the Talmud and I presume also Tanakh, and to hear him discourse on scriptural matters, it's like they say, hearing, preaching directly from the Most High. Now, I don't know about that, but what I do know is that the so-called the so-called Jewish Messiah, I think some of them are calling him that, cannot be the David Messiah of promise and prophecy. So let me start first with definitions as best as I can as to who really is the David Messiah of promise and prophecy. Well, that may be found in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 7, and there's a passage there starting at around verse 12 where this promise of the David Messiah is made to King David. And let me read, and when thy days be fulfilled, and this is God talking to David, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels. So this is the first requirement. And I will establish his kingdom. So this David Messiah must proceed out of the bowels of David, must be a bloodline descendant of David. And it goes on, he shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So who's the one that built the house? That was Solomon. Solomon was one of the sons of David. So the line must be from David through Solomon. That is the requirement. And it goes on in verse 14, I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever. So this is the other key point. The throne of David shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. So this is the essential Davidic promise of prophecy. Someone who would descend from the bowels of David, someone who will descend through Solomon, okay, and that line shall be established forever. Now certainly it has been interrupted. And I can go off on a sort of a big tangent there as to first the interruption and also to its being restored. So this whole project is a project of restoration of Zion, Zion kingdom, Zion order, which is essentially the idea that there will come a time after a long sort of trail where that son of David is to be restored, to be raised back up, to sit on this throne forever. Okay, so that's the David Messiah. But we have these so-called Jews who are not of the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and in general not of the line of Judah either, but somehow they have taken it upon themselves, or taken upon themselves the idea that they are now the inheritors of this Davidic promise, when in fact the vast majority of the so-called Jews today are of Khazar origin, Gentile origin. And they became Jews by conversion, not by blood. And yes, there were a number of Israelite of the seed, Levite priests that went over to that land of Khazaria at the invitation of King Bulan around 700 or so AD and performed the conversion. And for King Bulan, it was a sort of a political ploy to become a so-called Jew, to sort of, stave off the encroachment from the south of the Muslims, and also the encroachment from the north and the west of Christianity. Because the Christians and the Muslims both sort of gave deference to the people of the book. So it was a great political ploy for King Bulan. Now, I am relying here on work that has been done by Jewish authors themselves. There's a book called the 13th Tribe by one Arthur Kessler, and he has brought forward all this information. Another one by Shlomo Sand, The Invention of the Jewish People. Okay, and then there's another one which is a sort of a computerized, sort of numerical, sort of there's a word they use, pleometric sort of analysis, which is the application of quantitative techniques to historical analysis. And I've forgotten the author of that work, but he basically established an origin for the so-called Ashkenazi people right up there in Turkey. There's actually a village there still today called Ashkenaz. Okay, so he's identifying the real bloodline and tribal origin of the so-called Jewish people as being of the tribes of the Gentiles, the Japhetic people, who were polluted by that fallen angel Gog, who was the literal, physical, as well as spiritual father of that titular son of Japhet, who was named Magog. And so Magog, through that inheritance line that he brought coming down from that fallen angel, essentially polluted all of the children of Japhet to where it wasn't called the Isles of Japhet, it was called the Isles of the Gentiles. Because the word Gentile, the root of it is that paleo-Hebrew word gen, which means literally son of the wicked. Now that is hidden. You're not going to find that in modern Hebrew. But if you go back to the paleo-Hebrew and you have spirit as your guide, this information can be brought forward. And I've written about it in my book, The Coming of David Messiah. That is addressed there in chapter 2 of that book. So that the so-called Jewish people by tribe are Gentiles. Converted, yes, to this thing they call Judaism, but you cannot convert your tribal bloodline. Okay? Wherever you go, you will carry your blood with you. And so we're not defined by a religious creed. We're not defined by a landmass. We are defined by the bloodline that goes with us, like it or not. So their bloodline is of the eyes of the Gentiles, the sons of the wicked. They cannot escape that fundamental identity. Okay, so I'm alluding now here to why it is that this fellow now, they call him Yanuka Rav Shlomo Yehuda, as distinguished as he might be, he cannot be that David Messiah. Now, let me back up a little bit because, yes, there are those of the seed, the paternal bloodline of Israel that did indeed go up into the land of Khazaria and perform the conversion upon those people. But who was it that went? These were people of the tribe of Levi, because the Levites were the priests. The Levites were were the ones who were supposed to keep knowledge on their lips, and so were the ones best equipped to teach the people, Khazarian people that sought to be converted, all about the covenant that the Most High made with his chosen people as a matter of bloodline, namely the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's name having later been changed to Israel. More properly, as we now understand, Iye Shara Lo, as is developed in my book, The Coming of David Messiah. It's there in chapter 3. The true name of the Most High and all those in the line of the inheritance. So the Levites went up there, and so there will be Israelite bloodline descendants among the Khazar people. That is not disputed. But there are two objections there. Number one, the bloodline requirement for the David Messiah is that he must be come from the bowels of David, must be of the literal seed, paternal seed line of David, and through Solomon. And David was of the tribe of Judah, not Levi. And I mentioned that why? Because I have been given the gift of Urim to whom. And so I asked, what is the bloodline of this fellow that they're now putting forward as being the Jewish Messiah? And the answer I got was that he is indeed Israelite, but of the tribe of Levi. Well, if you are the tribe of Levi, you cannot be that David Messiah. Because the David Messiah, if he is to come from the bloodline of David, must also have come from the line of Judah. And the tribe of Levi and the tribe of Judah are two different tribes. So I know that he cannot be the Messiah because he is not of the tribe of Judah. He's of the tribe of Levi by blood. But even there is a further disqualification. And I dealt with this subject in an upload, an earlier upload, entitled, if memory serves me right, the David Messiah is the Negro Messiah. Why? Because there's a requirement. Not only is there a bloodline sort of requirement in terms of the promises made by the Most High to the children of Israel. In other words, the promises in Scripture, it's here in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, verses around 5 and 6, that covenant was made narrowly with the children of Israel. Ye shall alone. But there was provision made, and that's discussed in the book of Exodus. It's there already at the book at Exodus chapter 12, which allows for the stranger, one who is not of that covenant bloodline, to join in and cleave unto the children of Israel, and thereby become a member of the congregation of Israel. So there is a possibility that the stranger may join into this covenant. It is provided for in the law. But the requirement in that regard was that such a stranger had to sojourn with the children of Israel and had to have children with the children of Israel. That is the starting requirement. So that when the Levite priests went into the land of Khazaria to do this mass conversion of a whole tribe into this, what they now took to be the religion of Judaism, this was not the way by which they could fulfill the requirement in law of now cleaving to the children of Israel, because they never sojourned with the children of Israel. They never had children with the children of Israel. They didn't come to where we were. They didn't walk our walk with us. They didn't go into captivity with us when our time came to go into captivity. They remained a tribe unto itself, although, professing this sort of religion that they call Judaism. Now, but even then, there is this requirement here in Deuteronomy 23, which I addressed at some length in that earlier upload, why it is the David Messiah is the Negro Messiah, where they sojourn with us and they have children with us. There is nevertheless a requirement. Here in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 2, it says, a bastard shall not enter into the congregation of Yahweh. Even to his 10th generation shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord, of Yahweh. And I'll discuss the significance of that in a minute. An Ammonite or Moabite, likewise, not even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation, because they met you not with bread and with water in the way when ye came, blah, blah, blah. And in verse 7, thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. The children that are begotten of them shall enter into the congregation of Yahweh in their 3rd generation. All right. So let us say an Egyptian sojourns with the children of Israel. Or let us say that an Edomite sojourns with the children of Israel. And let us say that they have a child, let's say they have a son with with an Israelite. Either the son is of the Egyptian or Edomite father, or it could be the other way round, that the son is of an Israelite father, but it is an Edomite or an Egyptian mother. Here the law is saying very clearly that even so, they cannot enter into the congregation of Israel until the third generation. What that means? It means that that son must marry back into the tribe, have an Israelite spouse, and from an Israelite have the next generation. And then that one must also do the same thing so that now the third generation can enter into the congregation of Israel. You understand? What does that mean? The first implication is if say the first generation, it is a mix between Israelite and Edomite. So he's half Israelite, so to say, by blood. Well, the next generation, having married back into the tribe, will be 1/4 Israelite. Sorry, 1/4 of the strange blood, of the strange seed. And then in the third generation, it will be 12% of the strange seed. So that the Negro, the Israelite, sort of a share of that person's blood makeup, and therefore also their physiognomic makeup would be Israelite. So the sort of foreignness in their makeup would to that extent have been diluted out. They would be looking like an Israelite again. And this is in the best case scenario. Because we see for the Moabites and Ammonites is not even until the 10th generation, which means it must be in the 11th generation that those might come in. And as for the bastards essentially are those who are Gentiles, the Gentiles, from the land of the Gentiles. That's really what that word means. So it would take the 11th generation of such a mix to now be admitted into the congregation of Israel. But in all of those cases, because of this requirement here in the law, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23, by the time they enter into the congregation, although bringing sort of foreign seed, foreign blood, foreign tribal origin, they will be looking Israelite. They're going. So if they started out Negro, they're going to. By the time they can qualify to enter into the congregation, they're going to look Negro. Now, the assumption I'm making here is indeed that the children of Israel are essentially a Negro people, and that I have proved conclusively. It's there in the book Coming of David Messiah, chapter 2. Yes, chapter 2. I looked into the origin of the words Negro and Nega, because what we find out when we do that and go back to the original paleo-Hebrew, what we there find is that the word Negro, by definition, means those who are of the tribal root of Nega David. Nega was a praise title that was applied to King David. It means that son who was watched over impliedly or implicitly by the Most High. And this is the idea of David having been the apple of God's eye, so to say. So, and when we came off the slave ships, we were known as Negro. When you look at the prophecies that we were to fulfill, yes, when you look at those prophecies that the children of Israel were to fulfill, listed there in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verses 16 to 68, what we find is that the Negro is a match to every single one of those verses. So there can be no question but that we, the Negro, are the children of Israel. Okay? And for our iniquity, we were put into, among other curses, we were put into the 400 years of captivity from which we are just now coming out. Here is a picture of Judah, children of Judah, in Babylon, and we were famous even at that time for our music. And you can see the cornrow hairstyle, you can see the garments with the fringes, you can see the faces. These are Negro faces, and that's only one sort of archaeological, artifact that one may use. There are others as well. There's some from the siege of Lachish that are there. Um, so this book deals with where that word nigger comes from, as it applies to David, a praise title, which came then later to mean king. So nigger, David, is the way to say King David. And it's there still in various languages, and it's there in the Ethiopic. They speak today of the Kebra Negast, which means the Chronicles of the Kings. It's there in that Buddhist prophecy about the future Buddha, which they say will be named Nagarjuna or Nagarjuna, and it's there in Japanese Nagasaki and place names like that. So the word has existed, but they've tried to hide it when we go to the paleo-Hebrew. And let me not dwell too much on that. But here around the middle of the page, the 16th letter of to the leftmost column would be the paleo-Hebrew pictographic depictions. There in the middle of the screen, this one here is called Ga, and the pictographic is of an eye. And that one they sought to take out so it doesn't appear in the modern Hebrew. So if you go rightward in this table to the modern Hebrew, instead of the pictographic of an eye, there is now a letter called ayin, which they say is silent. Okay? Even though right to the column to the left of that, you see a strange inscription. It's GH, meaning Ga, and then they put NG within parentheses. And no doubt they knew what they were doing, because NG is a reference, no doubt, to nigger. And then they confused the matter, because here at the very bottom bottom of this table, the leftmost column, is that pictographic depiction of a wick. And they also give that one the name Ga. You cannot have in one table two pictographs with the same name. And that is an absurdity. And what Urim has guided me is that really that consonant there is named Gya, not Ga, but Gya. And because it's a wicked thing, it depicts the idea of a wicked thing, a twisted thing, because a wick is twisted, and it is because it is a wick, it is destined to be burnt. So it's conveying the idea of a wicked thing. Well, this Gya is that letter is now taken out. If you go rightward along that table under the column dealing with modern Hebrew, it's a blank. It does not appear in modern Hebrew. But this is the letter that is there, that makes that word Gentile. The word Gentile, the root of it is a two-letter paleo-Hebrew consonantal, Gya being the first one and the second one being Nun. Nun is depicted by a seed, so it represents the son of, or a continuation of. So Gya Nun could be pronounced, vocalized as Gien, carries the meaning of the son of the wicked. And that Gien is the root word of what has come down in the English as Gentile. Well, they have erased that altogether from the modern Hebrew. So if we're trying to find out even where that word Gentile comes from, you're not going to find it. So this is at the hand of these so-called Jews, because they were the ones who have taken possession of along with the Vatican, of our books and letters. You understand? And so they've been engaged in this conspiracy that is spoken of in Psalms 83 of trying to cut off the children of Israel from remembrance of who we are as a people. And to do that, they must also cut off from remembrance all what we know about who they are as a people. Because at the end of all of the sleight of hand, all of the smoke, all of the mirrors that they use to do that cutting us off from remembrance of who we are as a people, there is a war going on and has been going on, or at least a struggle going on, and the struggle is between the Negro and the and forces of Gog and Magog. Gog is actually the Amagog. Okay, let me go to and we the Negro, we have other names for ourselves. We the Negro are also referred to as the Amagededi. Gededi is that word with that Ga letter depicted by an I, and Dedi, which is another way of vocalizing the name David. And Amma is a prefix that means the people of, the children of. So Amagededi is the people of the watched over David. You understand? And it is from that word that we get the idea of the word Armageddon that is there in Scripture. There's a further prefix which is the R, which in the Hebrew is actually hard. It means the power of. Literally, it represents a horn or a mountain, or metaphorically, it represents a power. So the Har Armageddon came into the English as Armageddon, and so there's reference to the War of Armageddon. Well, who is waging war against Armageddon? It is the Amagog, the Gentiles. And this is what is referred to here in Psalms 83. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee. And now they list who these are: the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assur also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot. So essentially all of the tribes round about. Now, Gog and Magog are not mentioned here. But Edom is mixed in with them. Amongst the so-called Jews today are the Edomite Jews. They're now a minority. And the Khazar and the Ashkenazi have become the majority. But also mixing with them are the people that came in with the Assyrian captivity and were used to ethnically cleanse the northern tribes of Israel out of that land. So today they call the Sephardic Jews. But scripture records that there was an ethnic cleansing for these Sepharvaim they called in scripture, to come down into that land. So the Sepharvaim are also not bloodline Israelites. Edomites are not bloodline Israelites. And certainly today the Khazar and the Ashkenazi Jews are not bloodline Israelites. So they're all mixed, they're all part of this Psalms 83. Okay, so the war of Armageddon is this war of the Amagog, because the Gentiles basically have spread to infiltrate, to pollute all of these other lines as well. That's why they've all tended to become white. Because one of the features of the children of the fallen angels, which we find there in the book of Enoch, chapter 105, verses 5 and 6, when Noah was born, his father was alarmed because the boy came out white. Noah was an albino. And so the book of Enoch lets us to know that his father thought, well, he must be one of the offspring of the fallen angels, as Magog was an offspring of that fallen angel called Gog. So with that pollution, so to say, infiltration, so to say, all of the isles of the Gentiles tended to become now people of pale skin, as we know them to be. And by also the Edomites, actually Esau also was albino or close to it. And he also, even though he mixed in with the Hamites, the Egyptians were very dark-skinned people. He mixed in with the Canaanites, who at least originally would have been dark-skinned people. He mixed in with the Ishmaelites, who would have been dark-skinned people. And then he went up and he mixed in with the Gentiles. That's spoken of in the book of Joshua at various places. The grandson of Esau, Zepho, was made king over the children of Kittim, nowadays known as Rome. And then the Romans basically conquered the rest of the Gentiles. So Edom is very much mixed in with the Gentiles. And Edom today is mostly white people. And these other people also, because of that infiltration of Gentile seed line, have tended to become pale of skin. The Ishmaelites, who are at the core of the people that went down into the Arabian Peninsula and became the Arabs and later the Muslims, were a very dark-skinned people. And the Arabs are now the best brown-skinned people. They also have lightened in skin color. So this has been the sort of influence of spreading Gentile seed. So all of them are of Amagog, essentially. You won't go far wrong by instead of Psalms 83 listing here, simply saying the Amagog. And so the war is between the Amagog and the Amagededi. And the Amagog are against the rise of the horn, the Har Amagededi. So the people of Israel and certainly of Judah are known by that term Negro. We also known by that term Gededi, which itself is related to that other term Druid. Druid is not a reference per se to priests. The word Druid is a reference to the Negro. It has the same, it's Dal, which is referencing David, with a resh, letter resh in between, which is adverting to the root of David, which is a tribal root. So it has the same reference as Negro. And then there's that other word, dread, that only came to me, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks ago. That word dread, because I was a Nazarite servant of the Most High, and as a Nazarite servant of the Most High, I was not permitted to cut my hair. I just had to let my hair grow. So I acquired what we know certainly here in the Caribbean as dreadlocks. Dreadlocks. Let me show you a picture here. Here we are, right smack. So this is how I looked with my dreadlocks. Well, the word dread, it's now been changed to mean something, that is slightly scary. But really, dread is just simply DRD in the paleo-Hebrew, which again is the root of Nega David, which again is the Negro. So dreadlocks is essentially saying Negro locks, because this kind of knotting or locking of the hair is something that is very specific to the Negro. For a Gentile to get their hair to lock, they have to apply some kind of, technique, put wax in the hair or do something else. Otherwise, it's not going to lock. You understand? And if you were American, you certainly would have heard of the Dred Scott decision by the Supreme Court. The fellow's name was Dred, D-R-E-D, which is like saying Negro Scott. And by the way, the original people of Scotland were Negro people. Okay? And the United States Supreme Court decided that the Negro has no rights, that the white man needed to respect. So all of this to say that the so-called Jews, who are Jewish by religion, not by blood, cannot be the people from whom the Messiah, the Negro Messiah, is to come, because that is a requirement of blood. Must come from the bowels of David. And even if, as in the case with this Yanuka Rav fellow, even if he indeed is of the blood, literal paternal bloodline, go back to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, first of all, he's coming through the wrong tribe. He's Levite. He's not Judah, and therefore cannot be coming out of David. But in any case, having gone now, and his forefathers that would have gone amongst the Kesar people, no doubt to do that work of conversion, and he would have mixed in with the local females. Well, the offspring of such a union, that fellow, that first one, that first mixed seed, could not have been of the congregation of Israel under the law of Deuteronomy chapter 23. There would have needed to, you would have to find, he would have had to find a way to keep marrying back into the tribes of Israel to then become, after the 11th generation, to become now, for that descendant to become now a member of the congregation of Israel. By blood, it's a blood requirement and also a sojourning requirement. So they did not meet the requirement of sojourn, and they did not meet the requirement of Deuteronomy 23. Otherwise, this fellow would be looking like a Negro. And he does not look like a Negro. He looks like those with whom, no doubt, going back to 700 or so AD, he is now being mixed. So, in effect, he is a member of the Kesar house, even though by paternal seed line he may be a Levite, in fact. But he's not a member of the congregation of Israel. And if you are to be a member of the congregation of Israel under that Deuteronomy 23 law, you're going to end up looking like that Negro. You understand? And that is why the David Messiah must also be Negro, must also be a Negro Messiah, just in terms of how he looks. So this is why this fellow cannot be the David Messiah. I don't care how gifted he is. I don't care how learned he is. I don't care how much he has memorized of Scripture. I don't care how well he discourses upon Scripture. He cannot be that David Messiah coming through the bowels of David through Solomon to be the one to be raised back up to the throne of David. No, sir. And in that earlier upload, I also said the same earlier about the Rebbe of the Chabad Lubavitch sect, because he had been sort of, acclaimed by at least his followers as being that David Messiah, and it is also asserted, I saw that somewhere, that he himself said he was the David Messiah. Well, he can't be the David Messiah, and for the same reason. And he too, by the way, when I used Urim to him, turned out that he was also of the tribe of Levi. And even less can be that other fellow there in Israel today, Sami Daria, that they call Sami the Messiah, who is of Hindu extraction. He also claims to be the David Messiah. But even less can he be the David Messiah. I won't say any more about him, because the David Messiah will be a Negro Messiah. That is why in the United States they know it has to be a Negro that will come up. That's why they had the COINTELPRO program. That's why they brought down Marcus Garvey. That's why they brought down Martin Luther King. That's why they brought down Malcolm X. Because they know that Negro Messiah is going to come up at some point. And so as soon as one sort of lifts his head above the parapet and looks as though he might be the one, oh yes, they try to take him down. And that's why in the book of Revelation chapter 12, When that man-child was birthed, it says, and he was taken up to God and his throne. In other words, metaphorically, the protection was put upon him. Otherwise, he would be dead meat to the enemies, the Psalms 83 enemies that have come against the Negro and are implacably warring against the rise of the Negro. That is a real struggle that is going on in the world. Matter of fact, that's why they hate Russia so, because Russia at bottom is a Negro society in its origin. And they don't hide it. That's why the Russian icons show the prophets and the apostles and etc. as being Negro. That's why the original depictions of their own royalty, Peter the Great, Vlad the Impaler, Fyodor II, they show them as Negro. And that's why, by the way, those Ukrainian Nazis who sort of identify with the Edomite sort of hatred of the rise of Israel, that's why they hate Russia so. And that's why, for example, they have gone about Ukraine destroying all those statues of Pushkin, the famous Russian poet, because Pushkin was identifiably Negro in his physiognomy. You understand? That's why when the war broke out, the African people who were there and studying in Ukraine, they couldn't get on the train. It was just plain outright hatred of the Negro. That's what that is about. So let's be real. The David Messiah will be looking like a Negro. That is what it is. And I'm not even going to go into all of the signs. Well, let me just do some of them. Because if you look at the signs of the David Messiah, again, you're going to find that this fellow cannot be the David Messiah. Now, the first sign, of course, is that of Revelation chapter 12. Well, he is well learned and well schooled in Torah, well schooled in Tanakh, well schooled in Talmud, but they don't say well schooled in the New Testament because they will reject that New Testament. Why? Because, well, let me come back to this. Let me go first to Revelation. Let me put it in their face. Revelation chapter 2, verse 9. I know thy works and tribulation. This is Yeshua speaking. And poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy. This is a strong word. Of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Synagogue of Satan is the same as the Amagog. Because the Amagog, by the original paleo-Hebrew, we know to be the sons of the wicked one, who is Satan. That's just another way to describe those who are in rebellion against the Most High. But we don't say we are Jews. They say they are Jews and are not. Because to be a son of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah, fundamentally, it is not a creed, it's not a belief, it is not a religion that they call Judaism. It is a bloodline covenant. That's what that is. And the conversion that was brought to them by the Levite priests cannot convert them to a bloodline. Okay, so they can't be. Even those who are descended from one or two of the, or from one of those Levite priests that performed the conversion. But here in Isaiah chapters 52 and 53 are some of the signs. Well, let me actually go back to Revelation. Let me go back to Revelation because I want also to start with the most important of all the signs. Revelation chapter 12. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. Well, this describes an astrological conjunction which was there present in the sky on September 23rd, 2017. And that references the date on which that man child, who is that David Messiah, was birthed. Verse 5, and she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So this is the protection that God brought upon him when he was born. So whoever is the David Messiah must be able to tell a story as to what happened to them on that date, September 23rd, 2017, that could be construed as being the sign that he was birthed on that day. And that happened to me. And there's video upload on that as to what happened to me on that day. Because I stood to preach on that day in the village, which was a day of trumpets, the very first day of the 7th month. It was also a Shabbat day, and I was in the village here in Grand Riviere standing to preach. As I got ready to preach on this very passage, because it was all over the internet. The astrologers were having a field day. The Christians, were thinking, okay, this is going to be a rapture going to happen and this and that and etc. But it wasn't a rapture. It was the election, the selection, the anointing, the marking out of that man-child. So as I stood ready to preach, a Baptist woman, shouter Baptist, we call them here in Trinidad, started ringing her bell. She was about 100 yards away. She was not of the village. I'd never seen her before. And she came down about 100 yards, from about 100 yards distance from where I was. And I waited, thinking she might be herself, might want to preach. I was going to give all deference. Well, she came and she circled me 3 times, saying, Isaiah, Isaiah, Isaiah. And all who were present witnessed that. She marked me out as being that man-child. I did not know that was its significance at the time. But for some reason, the Most High had me to record it, and it's there in the epilogue to my book, Numerology and the 7 Days of Creation. So it was documented at the time. He made me to put it in there so that no one can later say, well, you're just making that up. It was documented. And Isaiah then came to me about 2 months later in a dream vision and let me to know that I was that one spoken of in Isaiah chapters 52 and 53, the so-called suffering servant. And at the time, I didn't even at that time connect it to the David Messiah. And then later on, I came to know that indeed Isaiah, he looked a lot like my grandfather. But later on, I came to know that indeed it is his line that is that righteous branch. And Isaiah goes back to David through Solomon. And I am descended from that Isaiah. Now, I don't have proof of that statement because I don't know if that was ever recorded in a book somewhere. So it would be interesting to find out because the Vatican people have our books, the Jewish people have our books. So when I make that statement, I'm making that statement not knowing whether in fact they have the books that would confirm it. Namely that Isaiah indeed came from the line of David through Solomon. But that would be that righteous branch. And when he came, he let me to know not only that I was that suffering servant, he let me to know here in this verse 10, yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. And then it says, instead of when he, it says, when thou shalt make his soul. Isaiah let me to know that that thou was speaking directly to me. That's why it was changed from third person to second person. He was speaking to me here. And then it changed back to third person. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. Well, guess what? I have 2 children and no grandchildren. They have not yet provided a seed for me to see. So this is yet to be prophesied, not yet to be fulfilled. But at least the condition is there that it could be fulfilled because my children have not yet provided me seed. If my children had already provided me seed, then this could not be fulfilled, could it? But that is as to me. But now let's take Isaiah 53 and put it to this fellow who is who? The Rav, Yanuka Rav Shlomo Yehuda. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. Well, this certainly doesn't apply to this fellow, because all these ancient rabbis are fawning all over him, kissing his hand. He's certainly not a root out of a dry ground. He's only 32 years and he's a rabbi, which means he has been part of this whole whatever institution that has surrounded him probably his whole life. Next verse, he is despised and rejected of men. Despised and rejected. These are strong words. Who despises this fellow? Who has rejected him? I can lay claim to that because after I announced that I am that David Messiah, let me tell you, I was not greeted with any sort of, universal acclaim or acclamation, not by a long shot. Okay, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. I used to be an international consultant. I worked with the World Bank. I was a sort of an up-and-coming executive. I was in charge of a $4.2 billion portfolio while I was a man of the world. Well, when I had my call, he brought me back here to Trinidad. And from that relative prosperity as being a man of the world, now I have been reduced to a certain destitution, certainly deprivation. I wouldn't say destitution. But this certainly applies to me, acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. Yes, I have been rejected by my own friends and family. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Because, I became a dreadlock. Well, some think I'm a Rasta. I'm not a Rasta. I'm a Nazarite servant. Well, it came to an end last year, April. I was 12 years a Nazarite. But as a Nazarite, I could not move in the social circles that otherwise I would have moved in. Not living out in the bush. I have no access to electricity. I have to be up and down the hill here every day in the village just to recharge my devices. So I live in a state of relative deprivation. I mean, but in fact, I'm probably in better health now than I would have been had I been living, you know, prosperous with a fat belly to show for it. I would have been a walking, cardiac candidate, you know. So I don't at all complain. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. Yes, that's what they think. Right? So, but does this apply to this fellow here? Isn't he even old enough, to have acquired the life experience to where he could be in this kind of a position? He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. What stripes can this fellow claim? What stripes? Well, I could say a lot more on that subject, but I've already made my essential point. This is just icing here on the cake. Essential point is that this no one who is a so-called Jew today, a Jew by conversion as opposed to a Jew by blood, can be that David Messiah. So that is the end of his claim, period. That was the end of the claim of the Rebbe, the Chabad Lubavitcher Rebbe. That is the end of the claim of that Sami Daria fellow. And by the way, I know I am not David Messiah. I'm not guessing. I know it. And after I had that visitation by Isaiah letting me to know these things, there appeared on my right palm a mole that wasn't there before. And that mole appears right there between two lines in the palm that look like legs outstretched, sort of, echoing the words of Revelation chapter 12, that man child that's straight to be delivered. I don't hang my whole claim on that, but that's another sign. And that's why this channel has been, to some extent, preoccupied with addressing the issues pertaining to the signs of the David Messiah. There's one, the signs of the coming of the David Messiah, one on the signs of the David Messiah, one on DNA-like analysis and signs of the David Messiah, one on the Shouter Baptist lady and me. So I stand on all of that. And just recently, another upload on the role of Trinidad, and because there's signs that the fellow would be raised up also in Trinidad. He'd be raised up in that land overseas, as indeed called for in Buddha's prophecy, as indeed is alluded to in alluded to in that book, the Seal Book of Moses. Here we are. You see book of Moses, chapter 12, verse 9. Behold, in the same way I, the Lord, which is the initial caps, so it is a reference to Yeshua, because it is his job to raise up the Moses, the last days Moses, or the David Messiah. I, Yeshua, will raise up, so that what that means is that Yeshua was never supposed to be the Messiah. He has a different role. He is, call him the Savior, call him whatever, call him the intercessor, but he was not and never was to be that David Messiah, because he was not from the bowels of David either. But that's another point. Will raise up a Moses in the last days, and I will give him power over a rod. So this is the motif that goes with the David Messiah, that rod, and the ability to write a record, but I will not let him speak much, for I will not untie your tongue. That is the tongue of Moses. But I will write unto him my law by the finger of my hand, which are the records of the ancient prophets of this place, that in this land overseas, my people will live by the teachings of a metal book. So, and then I say, this is me writing here now in the book, The Coming of David Messiah. Note carefully, and I jump down to item E. The metal book in question would be discovered in this land overseas, clearly referencing the Americas, since that is where the metal plates were revealed. These are the metal plates from which derived the Book of Mormon. It should therefore not be unexpected to find in due course that the Moses character himself also will be raised up in that land overseas, as we see later. So in chapter 6 of this book, The Coming of David Messiah, there's a whole chapter on from where will this David Messiah arise. Because I have been given that indeed he is to arise from this land here where I was born and to which I was returned, this land of Trinidad. It is the direct answer to the question. We know what will let me, as a matter of fact, let me go there. Okay. The matter is stated plainly. Well, let me continue here. The matter is stated plainly at verse 15, Nahum chapter 1, verse 15. Where it says, Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, which it alludes directly to Isaiah chapter 52, verse 7. It is from this verse that we may draw the inference that the David Messiah is to be raised up in Trinidad, which is his first name was Ray. That inference may be drawn immediately given the following two main premises. One, Nahum chapter 1 is the scriptural answer given to the question posed to Urim as to the role of Trinidad in prophecy. So I've been given Urim to whom. So I could ask that kind of a question. When I asked that question, it directed me here to the book of Nahum, chapter 1 in general and 15 in particular. 2, the highlighted clause, behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, is a reference to the coming of David Messiah. So Trinidad is identified clearly by Urim as being the land from where that David Messiah would arise. Well, if he is to arise from the Americas, that land overseas, if in particular he is to arise from this land called Trinidad, originally called Iyere, which in the Hebrew is that word that means the Most High will provide, Yehawa, Iyere, which is nowadays written in English as Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. Means that Trinidad is that land of providence so far as the David Messiah is concerned. Well, if he's to come from the Americas, that land overseas, as the sealed book of Moses says, if he's to come in specific from this land of Trinidad, then obviously he cannot also come from the inheritance land of Israel, which is where this Jewish fellow, Yanuka Rav, Shlomo Yehuda, which is where he is coming from. So he's not a fit from that angle either. But let me, as long as I'm talking about that, say a little bit about Urim e Tuhumim, because I mentioned earlier that he is this Shlomo fellow, that he is indeed of the tribe of Levi. I mentioned that earlier. Well, let me say a little bit about the significance of Urim e Tuhumim in that regard. Because there's a story told in the book of Ezra after the Israelites, or rather the Judahites, had come back into the land from their captivity amongst the Persians, and they were rebuilding that temple and so forth, or rebuilding that wall. And here at the book of Ezra, chapter 2, verse 63, the Tirshata, being the governor, said unto them that they should not eat of the most holy things till there stood up a priest with Urim and with Thummim. With them there being children of Barzillai, which is talked about there in verse 61. And in verse 62 they talked because they wanted to be reckoned amongst the priesthood. So in verse 62 it says, these sought their register among those that were reckoned by a genealogy, but they were not found. Therefore were they as polluted, put from the priesthood. So what did Tirshata, the governor, I think he was Zerubbabel, if I'm not mistaken, that they should not eat of the most holy things till there stood up a priest with Urim and Thummim. The implication being that a priest with Urim and Thummim could inquire as to the matter, as to their status, and speak dispositively as to that question. Are they or are they not of the priesthood line that should therefore be recognized as priests? So this is the significance of Urim and Thummim. When I started my walk with the Yahweh, with the Most High, Because this was in December 2009, I had been a priest of Ephod, by the way, and that word derives from the Hebrew word Ephod. Bring me hither the Ephod, because this is how they used to inquire as to what and what. Okay, when David wanted to know whether to go up, he'd bring me hither the ephod, and he would inquire whether to fight, whether to retreat, whether to run, etc. Okay, he would inquire of the ephod. Well, this is the paleo-Hebrew origin even of that Yoruba word Ifa. Okay, I was a priest of Ifa in that tradition, a priest of Shango in that tradition. But Ephod told me that at that point, I'd been 5 years a priest of Ephod at that point, that I had now to give my worship solely and only to the Most High. And because I had had the benefit of being able to use the ephod, so to say, through that system, I was bereft because, it is a way now to know what is going on. And I made appeal to the Most High, well, look, give me something because, what's going to replace this? And that's when he gave me Urim, Ephod, and he gave it to me in a dream vision as to how to set it up and as to how to inquire and as to how to get answers. I've written about it in my first book, The Appointed Time, The Tarrying and His Faith. It's in chapter 16, the restoration of Urim Ephod. And it is not the interpreting stones that are there that were used to decipher, to interpret, to translate the metal plates. That's a different kind of device. But the point is, I have been given Urim Ephod, which means that when I use it, I ask a question and I'm given an answer that I'm well able to interpret. So it is with that gift now that I can say that this Rav, Yanuka Rav Shlomo Yehuda, indeed is of the bloodline of Levi, which is disqualifying because to be the David Messiah, you must be of the bloodline of Judah, which he's not. But it also, by the way, affirms at the very least that he is of an Israelite bloodline, even though he is amongst these Gentiles. But in effect, he is now also a Gentile because he's of the house of the Gentiles. You understand? And in order to make it into the congregation of Israel back again, because it's not only that paternal line requirement, is also that requirement that his ancestors would have had to marry back, marry back 10 times. Actually, yes, 10 times, so that at the 11th generation, and he at that point would be looking like a Negro again. But he certainly doesn't look like a Negro. So he cannot even be of the congregation of Israel and under the law of Deuteronomy chapter 23. But I quote this Ezra chapter 2 verse 63 to give the authority by which I could say that the fellow indeed is of the paternal bloodline of Levi, and so also was the Rebbe. I didn't even inquire as to Sami Daria as to what bloodline he was, because I looked at him and he looked like a caste Hindu. If he's a caste Hindu, he cannot be of the bloodline of Judah, from what I know. Anyway, I didn't, because it's such a preposterous suggestion that he could be the David Messiah. I didn't even inquire as to that. But so we leave that to one side. So that's where I will stop. I think I've made the case I started out to make. This Jewish Messiah fellow cannot be the David Messiah. Why? Because the David Messiah will be Negro of phenotype when he comes, certainly because of Deuteronomy chapter 23, and also for other reasons I have discussed. Okay, so with that, I give all praise, I give all glory, I give all exaltation unto the Most High God, Yahweh. And to those who are still here with me listening, I first of all give you the thanks for that, and I wish you Shalom.